around East Texas, you've probably seen it, even if you don't know what it is. We're talking about an invasive plant that covers trees and fences called kudzu. It's so prolific that plant experts are warning you to be on the lookout.
They said it was just a weed. They said Alabama was overreacting. But when you look at the recent data coming out of the soil and the air, you realize this is not normal biology. It is a takeover. The methods used to eliminate it were mocked as primitive, but they were the only thing holding back a total collapse of the ecosystem. We now know that this plant is essentially on steroids provided by modern industry. The story of how Alabama tried to warn us and how we ignored them is a wake-up call we cannot afford to miss. The Trojan horse we invited in. It started with a party. That is the crazy part. It wasn't an invasion, it was an invitation. Back in 1876, the United States was celebrating its 100th birthday with a massive event called the Centennial Exposition. It was a place to show off the newest inventions, the best machines, and the most beautiful plants from around the world. Japan built a stunning garden filled with sweet-smelling blooms and broad, lush leaves. The Americans who walked through that garden were mesmerized. They had never seen anything like it. It was elegant, it was exotic, and it grew incredibly fast. This plant was kudzu, and at that moment it was the star of the show. Here is the deal. In the late 1800s, Americans were obsessed with exotic things. If it came from far away, it had to be better. Nursery owners saw the crowd's reaction and saw dollar signs. They began selling kudzu as an ornamental vine for porches. It was marketed as the perfect way to create shade in the hot southern summers. People planted it lovingly next to their front doors. They watered it. They cared for it. They had no idea they were planting a monster that would eventually try to eat the very house they were trying to shade. But the real explosion happened a few decades later, and this is where the government gets involved. During the Dust Bowl era, American soil was in trouble. It was washing away in the rain and blowing away in the wind. Farmers were desperate. The government looked for a solution, and they remembered the fast-growing vine from the exhibition. They decided that kudzu was the miracle vine. They didn't just suggest planting it, they paid people to do it. The government paid farmers up to $8 an acre, which was huge money back then, to blanket their fields with this stuff. They set up kudzu clubs. They crowned kudzu queens at festivals. It was a massive propaganda campaign. They planted over 70 million seedlings. But here is the catch. Nobody stopped to ask why it grew so fast. In its home country, kudzu has natural enemies. There are insects that eat it and cold winters that freeze it back. But in the warm, humid climate of Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi, there were no predators. It was an all-you-can-eat buffet with no bouncers. By the 1950s, the tone changed. Farmers noticed that the miracle vine didn't respect property lines. It didn't stop at the edge of the field. It crawled into the forests, it climbed the telephone poles, it enveloped barns, and it moved with a speed that felt supernatural. We are talking about a foot a day. In the peak of a humid Alabama summer, you can practically watch it move. There is a wild theory that has circulated in the Deep South for years. Old-timers swear that if you sit quiet enough on a porch at night, you can actually hear the vine growing. They say it sounds like a low crackle, the sound of fibers stretching and leaves unfurling in the dark. For years, experts dismissed this as folklore, just scared farmers telling ghost stories. But recently, some botanists have suggested that what they are hearing is the hydraulic pressure inside the plant. Kudzu pumps water so aggressively to fuel its growth that it might actually create audible vibrations. Imagine a plant so powerful it hums with energy. But the rest of the country didn't hear the humming. They just saw the pictures. They saw photos of cars completely covered in green looking like chia pets. They saw abandoned houses that looked like green mounds, and they laughed. The mockery was relentless. People in the North joked that Southerners were just too lazy to trim their hedges. They said, "How can you let a weed take over your car?" They didn't understand that if you park a car in a kudzu field and walk away for a week, the tires are gone. Come back in a month, and the engine block is wrapped in vines. The mockery was based on the idea that humans are always in control of nature. If a plant is winning, it must be because the humans are failing. But the farmers in Alabama knew something the city slickers didn't. They knew this wasn't a normal plant. They sensed a level of aggression that felt intentional. This leads to one of the darker theories about the introduction of kudzu. While the official story is about erosion control, some conspiracy theorists believe the government knew about the risks. There are documents suggesting that some botanists warned the agencies that the plant was too aggressive, but the bureaucrats were so desperate to stop the soil loss that they ignored the science. They chose a short-term fix that caused a long-term disaster. It is a classic case of people thinking they know better than nature. And get this, by 1970, the government officially declared kudzu a weed, but it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle, and it had covered 7 million acres. The miracle vine had become the green menace, but even then, people didn't realize the full extent of the horror. They thought it was just a surface problem. You cut it, it dies, right? Wrong. The real monster wasn't the green leaves you could see. It was the massive alien-like structure growing beneath the feet of the people who were trying to fight it. The mockery continued because from the highway, it just looked like a lot of leaves. But for the people on the ground, it was a daily battle for survival. And as they were about to find out, the plant had a secret weapon that made their machetes and lawnmowers look like toys. The green concrete. So here's the deal. When you realize your land is being eaten, you try to eliminate the thing eating it. Alabama declared war on kudzu. And this is where the mockery from the rest of the country got really loud, because no matter what the locals did, the plant kept winning. The first line of defense was mechanical: mowers, tractors, machetes. But kudzu is not grass. The vines are tough, fibrous ropes. They wrap around axles and choke engines. You can ruin a $10,000 tractor in an afternoon trying to clear a kudzu patch, and even if you manage to cut it, the plant has a terrifying survival mechanism. Every node on the vine, that is every place where a leaf comes out, can root into the ground and start a new plant. So when you run a mower over it, you are basically chopping it up into thousands of little baby plants and scattering them across the dirt. You aren't eliminating it, you are farming it. Then came the fire. It makes sense, right? Burn it to ash, and sure, kudzu burns. The dry vines in winter go up like gasoline. But the fire moves fast. It scorches the leaves and blackens the stems. For a few days, it looks like you won. The field is black and quiet. But then the rain comes, and within a week, bright neon green shoots poke out of the ash. It is psychological warfare. The plant seems to come back angrier after you burn it. This is where the lazy insults really hurt. Outsiders would see a farmer burn a field and 2 weeks later see it green again and assume the farmer didn't do a good job. They didn't understand the biology. The secret is underground. Kudzu puts most of its energy into massive tubers. These are root balls that look like giant deformed potatoes. They can grow to the size of a human, weighing up to 400 pounds. They can go 6, 8, 10 feet deep into the red clay. These tubers are survival bunkers. They store water and starch. When you cut the leaves or burn the top, the tuber just shrugs. It has enough energy stored up to regrow the entire plant dozens of times over. It is like fighting an iceberg. You are only attacking the tip. Then came the chemical era. Herbicides, the heavy stuff, strong industrial poisons. Farmers sprayed millions of gallons of poison on the South, and for a while it looked like it might work. The leaves would wither and drop, but then the wild theories started to feel real. Farmers began to notice that after a few years of spraying, the kudzu didn't die as easily. It was as if the plant was learning. Now, plants don't have brains, right? That is what we are taught. But there is a field of science called plant neurobiology that suggests plants can sense danger and communicate. Some researchers speculate that when a kudzu vine is attacked by poison, it sends chemical signals down to the root and out to the other vines connected to it. It tells the colony, "Danger here, shut down the pores, drop the leaves, protect the root." It acts like a hive mind. You spray one section and the whole patch reacts. It retreats underground, waits for the poison to wash away, and then surges back. This intelligence is what terrified the locals. They felt like they were fighting a thinking enemy. The mockery from the media ignored this complexity. They just saw weeds. They didn't see the structural damage. Kudzu is heavy. The sheer weight of the water inside the vines can pull down a full-grown oak tree. It creates a green concrete effect. It covers a forest, weighs down the canopy, and snaps the trees in half. And it's not just trees, it pulls down power lines, it rips siding off houses. There are rumors of old wooden barns in remote areas that simply collapsed inward, crushed by the slow, constricting hug of the vine. The wildest theory linked to this physical dominance is the idea of electromagnetic sensitivity. Some fringe researchers have suggested that kudzu is attracted to electricity. They point to how often it climbs power poles and wraps around transformers. Is it just seeking height, or is it feeding on the electromagnetic field? While mainstream science says it is just looking for sun, the coincidence is creepy. Utility companies spend millions of dollars a year to scrape this stuff off the wires. If it is just seeking sun, why does it seem to target the grid? The failure of mechanical and chemical warfare led to the goat solution. We talked about this briefly, but let's go deeper. People started renting herds of goats. Goats are the only things that seem to hurt it. They graze it down to the nub. But you have to keep the goats there for years. The moment the goats leave, the root wakes up. So the South was stuck. They had a plant that broke their machines, survived their fires, and laughed at their poisons. The rest of the world mocked them as incompetent, but the locals knew the truth. The game was rigged, and the biggest twist was yet to come. Because while the farmers were looking down at the roots, the real fuel for the monster was floating in the air above their heads. The plant wasn't just tough, it was being performance-enhanced by the very thing humans were creating: pollution. Nature's toxic cheat code. Here is where the story shifts from a gardening problem to a global catastrophe. For years, people couldn't figure out why kudzu was accelerating. Yes, it was always fast. But in the 1990s and 2000s, it seemed to shift gears. It was growing in places it shouldn't. It was recovering from winter faster. The mockery continued. Oh, it's just the South being hot. But the farmers were right to be suspicious. A team of researchers at a major university decided to investigate. They had a hunch. Plants eat carbon dioxide, CO2. We all know this. We have been pumping massive amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere from cars, factories, and power plants. The researchers wondered, does kudzu like this extra CO2 more than other plants? The answer was a terrifying yes. Most native trees in the South, pines, oaks, maples, are like polite eaters. They take a bit of extra CO2, grow a tiny bit faster, but eventually they get full. They have a limit. Kudzu is a glutton. It has no limit. The study showed that as CO2 levels rise, kudzu does not just grow, it mutates in functionality. It treats the carbon like steroids. It grows faster, bigger, and stronger. But here is the catch. It doesn't just make more leaves, it changes its water efficiency. Usually, a plant has to open its pores to let carbon in, but that lets water out. It is a trade-off. But with so much carbon in the air, kudzu can get all the food it needs without opening its pores as wide. This means it keeps its water. It becomes drought-resistant. So while the native trees are suffering from heat and drought, kudzu is hydrated and hulking out on carbon steroids. It is a double advantage. This validated every crazy theory the Alabama farmers had. They weren't fighting a normal weed. They were fighting a monster that was being fed by the global economy. Every time someone in Los Angeles or New York drove a car, they were helping the kudzu in Alabama strangle a tree. But it gets wilder. The wild theory here is that kudzu might be actively altering the local weather. Massive patches of kudzu are dark green and dense. They absorb heat differently than a forest. Some speculate that these massive infestations create heat islands that change the local humidity and temperature, creating a microclimate that is perfect for, you guessed it, more kudzu. It is terraforming. The plant is changing the environment to suit itself. And let's talk about the nitric oxide mystery. The research found something else that made the scientists' blood run cold. Kudzu fixes nitrogen in the soil. We mentioned this. But when you combine that with high CO2, the soil chemistry goes haywire. The soil under kudzu starts releasing nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas that is nearly 300 times more potent than CO2. So the plant eats the carbon, grows huge, and then forces the soil to burp out an even worse gas. It is a pollution machine. This shattered the argument that at least it's green and making oxygen. The green monster is actually a villain in the climate change story. It is accelerating the very problem that feeds it. The mockery of Alabama looks incredibly foolish in this light. The state was the canary in the coal mine. They were the first to experience the carbon fertilizer effect on a massive scale. The reason their herbicide stopped working wasn't incompetence. It was because a plant on steroids can heal itself faster than the poison can eliminate it. And there is another layer to this conspiracy. Some botanists believe that this carbon-fueled growth is making the plant physically tougher. The fibers are becoming denser. The vines are becoming more wood-like sooner. It is evolving from a vine into a sort of flexible tree. If this theory holds, we might see kudzu vines that are so hard you can't cut them with a standard machete. We might need chainsaws for vines. The realization that the air itself is the enemy changed everything. You can't fence out the atmosphere. You can't spray the air. The South was fighting a battle against the sky. And get this, the extra carbon isn't just making it bigger, it's making it produce more pollen. Kudzu pollen is a major allergen, so not only is it eating the land, it is literally making the air harder to breathe for the people living there. The everyone mocked Alabama narrative falls apart when you realize that Alabama was just the petri dish for a global experiment. And now that the experiment has been successful in the South, the monster is looking for new territory. It is looking north. And thanks to the warming climate, the invisible wall that kept it safe is melting away. The underground kingdom. We have talked about the roots, but we haven't talked about the soil. This is where the wild theories get really disturbing. When kudzu takes over a field, it doesn't just sit on top of the dirt, it changes the dirt. It is a legume, so it takes nitrogen from the air and puts it into the ground. Usually this is good. Farmers pay for nitrogen fertilizer. But kudzu overdoes it. It pumps so much nitrogen into the soil that it creates an imbalance. The native plants in the South are adapted to poor soil. They like it lean. When kudzu dumps a nitrogen bomb on them, the native seeds can't handle it. They get burned chemically or outcompeted by weeds that love nitrogen. So even if you manage to rip up the kudzu, the soil is ruined for the original forest. It has been chemically altered to only support kudzu or other invasive species. This is the zombie soil theory. The idea is that the plant curses the land even after it is gone. And there is a darker speculation here: microbiology. The soil under a kudzu patch is teeming with bacteria that thrive on this specific chemical mix. Some fringe ecologists wonder if kudzu is cultivating a specific type of microbiome that attacks the roots of other trees. Is it waging biological warfare underground? We know that plants compete for root space, but kudzu roots are so massive and dominant that they might be physically crushing the roots of the pines and oaks. It is a slow-motion strangulation in the dark. Let's revisit the 400-pound root ball. These tubers are high in starch. In some cultures, they use it for food and medicine. But here it is just a battery pack for the invasion. The terrifying part is how long they can survive. There are stories of developers bulldozing a kudzu patch, pouring concrete over it to build a parking lot, and 2 years later the asphalt starts to crack. The kudzu was alive in the dark under the concrete, waiting. It found a tiny crack, a little bit of moisture, and pushed its way up. It can eat through pavement. This structural damage is one of the reasons it is so expensive. It is not just a plant, it is a demolition crew. And what about the ancient bacteria theory? This is pure speculation, but it is circulating in the weird science forums. The idea is that when kudzu was brought over from the east, it didn't come alone. It brought microscopic hitchhikers in the soil, ancient strains of bacteria or fungi that are native to its home but alien to America. These invisible allies might be helping it digest the local soil and fight off local diseases. If this is true, we aren't just fighting a plant, we are fighting an entire imported ecosystem that is microscopic and impossible to track. This connects back to the mockery. People thought the solution was simple: just dig it up. But if the soil itself is infected and the roots are hiding 10 feet down and the plant can punch through concrete, digging it up is a joke. The persistence of the root system is what makes the eliminate rate so low. You can poison the leaves, but the tuber has a safety valve. It can sever the connection to the dying stem to save the main body. It amputates its own limb to survive the poison. That is a level of biological strategy that is almost scary to think about. The The zombie soil implies that we might never get those forests back. Once a kudzu forest, always a kudzu forest? We hope not, but the data is grim. The biodiversity in these areas drops to near zero. It becomes a monoculture, a green desert, and now this desert is moving. The chemical changes in the soil might be preparing the ground for the plant's northward expansion. It is paving its own road with nitrogen. The $500 million bill. For a long time, the North felt safe. It gets too cold here, they said. Kudzu freezes. That was true, but the climate is warming, the winters are getting milder, and the kudzu is adapting. We are now seeing cold, hardy strains of kudzu appearing in Illinois, Pennsylvania, and even Oregon. The green monster has learned to wear a winter coat. The mockery is fading fast as people in the Midwest start seeing the familiar vine creeping up their utility poles. And this brings us to the most terrifying aspect of the future, the infrastructure collapse. Kudzu is heavy. We mentioned this. But imagine that weight on our aging infrastructure. Bridges, power grids, old buildings. We are already dealing with crumbling roads. Now add a plant that grows a foot a day and weighs tons. There is a wild theory that is truly the stuff of nightmares. It is the polymer diet theory. Right now, kudzu climbs plastic and rubber, but it doesn't eat them. But some biologists worry that as plants evolve in our pollution-filled world, they might develop enzymes to digest synthetic materials. We have already seen bacteria that can eat plastic. What if kudzu, with its incredible adaptability and fast mutation rate, figures out how to derive energy from the plastic coating on power lines or the siding of houses? If that happens, it stops being an invasive species and starts being a civilization eater. It sounds like sci-fi, but nature has done crazier things. The economic cost is already exploding. It is estimated that kudzu causes over $500 million in damage annually. That is $500 million, and that number is from a few years ago. With the carbon steroid boost, the cost is likely much higher. Railroads are particularly vulnerable. The vines grow over the tracks. When a train comes, the wheels crush the vines. The juice from the vines acts like grease. It makes the tracks slippery. Trains lose traction. They can't brake effectively. There have been derailments blamed on weeds. Kudzu is literally derailing our supply chain. And what about the fires? We said fire doesn't eliminate the roots, but dead kudzu vines in the winter are perfect kindling. They act like a ladder for fire. If a forest fire starts on the ground, kudzu carries the flames straight up into the canopy of the trees. It turns a small brush fire into a crown fire that destroys everything. So the South was mocked for letting it happen. But now the North is facing the same enemy, but an evolved version. A version that eats carbon, resists cold, and grows faster than ever. The WTF realization is that we might be too late to stop it. The eradication phase is over. We are now in the management phase, which is just a fancy word for learning to live with the monster. But there is a glimmer of hope, or perhaps just irony. Scientists are now looking at kudzu as a source of biofuel. If it grows so fast and has so much energy, maybe we can burn it to run our cars. It would be the ultimate circle. We create pollution. The pollution feeds the kudzu. We turn the kudzu into fuel, which creates pollution. It is a dystopian cycle, but it might be our only choice. The story of Alabama and the kudzu is a warning. We mocked the people who were on the front lines. We ignored the signs that nature was changing. We pumped the air full of plant food and were surprised when the plants got hungry. The green monster is not just a weed, it is a mirror. It shows us exactly what happens when we mess with the balance of the world. The locals who lost their farms knew it 50 years ago. They knew this wasn't normal. Now, as the vines creep toward the Mason-Dixon line and beyond, the rest of America is about to find out exactly what it feels like to be swallowed whole. The theories about hive minds, zombie soil, and eating plastic might be speculative now, but remember, 50 years ago, the idea that a plant could eat the atmosphere to become invincible was considered a joke. What do you think? Is this nature's way of reclaiming the planet, or is there a way to stop it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to keep exploring the dark side of nature with us, smash that like button and subscribe. See you in the next one.